Hi there. So welcome to this video that I've made. I've actually made this specially for a workshop that I'm running in a week's time in Dovedale in the Peak District. And it was just a little pre-workshop video that I've made for the participants. If you're watching this and you're not joining me, you're more than welcome to have a watch. It's a brief overlook over water, woodlands, trees, and landscapes, which are the three elements we are going to be checking out when we're in Dovedale. And this was just a pre-workshop, as I say, it's a pre-workshop video just to bring everybody up to speed so that when we get on location, we can all get started. But hopefully, if you're not joining us, it maybe gives you a few tips and tricks. And if you're interested, there's details on my website and email. So if you want to get in touch for future workshops, that kind of thing, you're more than welcome. I hope you enjoy it and look forward to seeing you soon, guys.
Right, so as I mentioned before, we're going to have a brief overview of ICM water, woodlands and landscapes. It also includes trees because in the location where we're going to be won't necessarily be big woodlands, it'll be more sort of clumps of trees or small individual trees. But the same concepts can be given to any tree as they would with woodlands. And as I mentioned before, this is actually a brief overview of these three subjects in preparation for the Dovedale workshop that I'm going to be holding on Friday the 3rd in the Peak District. I'm back in the UK for a few days for the Guild of Photographers Awards in Stoke-on-Trent, and I thought I'd put on a workshop while I was back and meet a few people. It's always lovely to work with people online, but it's even lovelier to meet people in the flesh. So I'm really glad to be able to meet up with a few of you. Hopefully what this does is gives you just like a little, maybe might just jog your memory if you've already followed the courses with me. If you haven't followed the courses with me, hopefully it gives you an idea of how I work and some concepts that you might find useful to have before we get out on site. We won't be doing a theory less. Some workshops start with a theory less in a room somewhere. We won't be doing that. We'll be meeting up in the car park and getting started straight away. So it's really good if we can jump in and you've at least seen this before we meet up. So this is not ICM specific, this slide, okay? It's a concept, it's a way that I like to work in all my kinds of photography, and it's thinking about finding the image. And I call it general mindful concepts because I think it's all about just taking the time to find the image or ask yourself why you want to photograph something. So I always say to people, if something makes you stop to make its photo, just take a moment to ask yourself what it was you noticed, okay? And each and every single one of us will notice something different. It's not one specific thing that everybody will notice. We might look at a bunch of flowers. Somebody will notice the shape of the petals. Somebody else will notice the light falling on the flower. Somebody else will notice how the colour is amazing. Each of us is sort of programmed to do whatever we want, and we notice different things, which is wonderful. So when you get to a location, think and you spot something and it says, you know, I want to photograph that. Think about, was it a colour? Was it a composition, a light or a point of interest or an emotion you felt? And if you can identify this trigger, then you can use this to bring strength to your images and create an image which is representative of why you picked your camera up to start with. So if you can sort of take this time to just slow down and ask yourself, what was it I saw? What do I actually want to create with my image? Then you can actually make I think you can recognise when your image is sort of when you're creating actually what you meant to create, if that makes sense. It might be that you only noticed a small element in the location and therefore you need to hone in on that small element rather than taking the great big location. At Dovedale we've got water, we've got trees, we've got landscape, so there's going to be an awful lot going on, so it'll be really interesting on what everybody sort of zooms in on or notices themselves, and each of us is very different as to what we notice. And then think about what element is it that's unique to the image you're making. So even within a set specific area, you may then even go further in to figure out what it is that you're looking at. Just for example, these are three very different images. The first one is on my road, and these are deliberately not ICM images because I just want you to look at them and think, what do I notice personally? When I say I mean you, not me, because I know exactly what I notice. But I just want yourself to sort of have a look and just ask once each image in turn, what is it that first took your eye? And I've made these photos with what took my eye in the moment. And the first one, obviously, I saw the sun rays, and I've taken a lot of pictures on this location on this morning, and they're all very, very different because I was trying to figure out what it was that actually caught my attention. But what caught my attention, first of all, without a question, was the white light coming through here. So all the other images that I kind of went on to look at this light, but this was kind of a location image just to show you. When I got on this location, what did I see? Well, I noticed the reflections more than the buildings above. Okay, of course, the reflections come from the buildings above. And then I noticed the colours, and then I noticed the shapes, that kind of thing. This last one, it was all about the colour for me. I noticed the catkins because they created a little bit of contrast because they were dead in comparison to these lovely leaves. But it was the lovely yellow leaves that I noticed. So you will all notice something different, and it's really worth taking the time to just question what it is you're seeing. Now, using this in your ICM, you want to think about how you can use what you've noticed in the movement of the camera for your ICM movement. So think about things like, is the thing you've noticed a calm element? Is it a busy element? Is it fast? Is it moving? Is it still? And if it's moving, is it moving in a certain direction? Has it got a change of direction? Is that movement soft or hard? Is it sharp or smooth? And all of these things are going to affect the direction and the fluidity of the movements that you make with your ICM image. But again, if you take the time to just recognise these things, you'll be much better equipped to figure out what the movements you might want to be making. And then, do you want your ICM to be recognisable in its representation, or are you looking for something a little bit more abstract? Did you notice the whole location or just part of it? Now, these are just completely personal things. You know, some people walk in and they want to photograph the whole location. Other people just want to create something very small. Some people want their ICM to represent what the location or the thing is. Other people want to go completely abstract. There is no right, there is no wrong. You do what you want. So we're going to be looking at water, trees and landscape. So water, think about what you hear. What direction is the water moving? How fast is it moving? You might even, if you're brave, because it's February, put your hand in it. What do you feel? Because you'll suddenly realise that water isn't hard at all. Even if it looks as though it's quite hard, moving quite speedily and harshly, you'll realise how soft it is. Trees, what do you hear? What movement do you see? Or is there a feeling that you want to portray? I mean, I have no idea whether they're going to be sitting there in the mist or the snow or whatever, and hopefully not the pouring rain. With landscapes, what do you feel when you're stood there? Are you in awe of the landscape? Do you feel small? Do you feel happy, scared? You know, you can have any positive or negative emotions. Then do you see smooth lines or sharp edges? This will really impact in the movements that you make with your ICM. Did you notice the whole landscape, or did you just notice something within it? Again, I think when we're all stood there, everybody's going to be noticing something very different. So, water first of all. I teach a deep dive course, which a number of you have already been on. But if you haven't heard of it before, it's a 6-session course where we go over 12 weeks. We go through 5 different subjects, and you have 2 weeks to do homework each time. So a lot of these slides are from that course. But just to run you through fairly quickly, simple basics regardless of the type of water. Okay, so shutter speed. You're going to find that you can hold a little more detail in the water movement if you use a faster shutter speed. It's the same as when you have long versus short exposure photography. You know how you get these beautiful fluffy waterfalls when you have a slightly longer shutter speed. It's exactly the same thing with ICM. If you use a longer shutter speed, the water has more time to move. Of course, you can create a softer image with longer shutter speeds because, again, you can move your camera and the water has more time to move. Just remember that the light reflects off the water, so there's a very high chance of needing filters. If you haven't got a filter yet, you might just about have time to get hold of one. I will have a set that somebody can borrow if needs be, but it does depend on whether it links up to your camera or not. Then what you're going to be doing is following the movement of the water. Now, this is just a suggestion because you can always break the rules. But you might think about if you see little waves, is there a little curl in it? You might look at the fall of the water over a waterfall or over little stones. Or you might be looking at the meander of a stream around a bend. All of these things are sort of directions to follow the movement with. Your shutter speed that you're going to be using will depend on a number of factors. And this will be the sort of results you want to achieve. the light conditions, if you have filters, and personal choice. Okay, very much a personal choice as to regards whether you want lots of detail or whether you want a fluffy sort of image. With regards to light conditions, if it's very bright, you're going to be restricted as to how fast you can go if you haven't got filters. Just remember, the faster the shutter speed, the faster you'll need to make movements to see the ICM rather than a blur. So although you want to shorten it down a little bit, you don't want to shorten your shutter speed so far that you can't actually have time to move the camera at all. Remember, with slower shutter speeds, you can get a little bit more creative with your movements. You can decide whether to continue the movement throughout the whole shutter speed, or whether to stop and move, or whether to change direction. But a longer shutter speed ICM always creates a slightly softer image. What you want to do is look for interest, and there's a little slide on most of these. Light versus dark, shade versus sun, slow versus fast speed of water, gentle versus vigorous movement of the water, the background colours and interest in the image, and directional change. We're just going to have a look at these. Just very briefly, for this shoot I went with the idea of capturing movement of the water, and it's just to give you an indication. We're not going to see a massive waterfall like this at Dovedale, but it's just to give you an indication. So I turned up there and I was hoping for some water sparkles with the sun. I'd shot water before, so I knew the basic technique to follow the water. And I wanted to capture what the waterfall felt like and sounded like and the energy it had. So it was really kind of powerful, and it was really noisy. And when I got there, I was delighted because it had a little bit of sun. So what you're going to see here now in this video is the waterfall. Excuse my video, because my videoing skills are not anywhere near as good as my photography skills. But hopefully just notice where I move with the video as I do it, so that you can just get a feeling for the things I was looking and noticing at. So these are some images that I made afterwards, and I noticed the top of the waterfall where it was really smooth, and when I made a downwards movement I got these lovely straight lines. You've got black from the rock, white from the waterfall, green from the reed behind it, and that was very simple, very abstract. Then I noticed how the water was landing, as I said before, like change of direction, stuff like that. I noticed how the water was landing on top of this rock here and bouncing off, and then you've got lots and lots of different directions and lots of different movements and speeds of water in this one. This one here again, I noticed how the water was coming down, hitting this rock and bouncing off. And I did a sort of slide to the right and downwards. You can see the ICM movement down this direction. And again, I loved how the light just hit this one. It was like a little mountain, and I just loved how the water was pinging off the top here. So I just wanted to bring a little bit of softness and a little bit of energy to it. And then I went a bit wider with my lens after I'd noticed all these small points within the waterfall. I then zoomed out a little bit and tried to capture the whole, it's not the whole waterfall, but a little bit more of a story rather than just individual locations within it. So when you're on water, have a look for things like light versus dark, and you can see the difference it can make. It can create lovely shadows in your water for you, and it can really sort of shape where you want somebody to look. Shade versus sun, it's really interesting in this one. The areas that are sunny have got very, very sharp ICM movements. Now this is just one image, so I made the same movement throughout the whole image, and yet the areas that are shadowed here, here, here and here are a lot softer than the ones that are in the sun. And this was probably because the sun sparkles made a lot of, they kind of moved more jaggedly, and there was much more of a sharper movement. So that is reflected in the ICM. So you can have a bit of fun there. Gentle versus vigorous water movement. So as the water comes over over the edge, it's quite smooth. You know, here we've got a really, really smooth, we've got nothing going on, and then as it lands it's got a sort of really energy pounding round. Same here, you've got this lovely white fluffy water and then the smoother water on either side. Directional change in water, you saw on my waterfalls a minute ago. Whenever the water changes direction, that gives you a fantastic opportunity to kind of pick up a direction that it's moving in. The effect of shutter speed, these are just an indication to show how increasing the shutter speed can create slightly softer image. These three were shot exactly the same location, exactly the same thing. And you can see at about a fifth of a second, you can still capture a little bit of freezing movement if you really try. You know, the water hasn't had time to move the whole way through its movement on this one. We kind of caught it halfway. At about half a second, we're getting a little bit more sort of not quite so much detail, a little bit more of just sort of an indication of the movement. And at 1 second, it's become quite soft and it looks a little bit more fluffy. So again, it just depends on what you want to portray with your image. Don't forget, we may find flat water. You've got reflections in those. These are looking into the water. You can just see I noticed some super reflections, and I just made a downwards movement with my camera. In this one, this is actually a reflection. There was the trees, branches in the water below. And again, I just moved in sort of diagonal, slightly downwards movement just to get a reflection there. So moving on to trees, woodlands or trees, look for contrasts. Try and keep it simple, look for simplicity because it makes an easier composition to look for. Think about balancing your image just the same as you would with any image, not just ICM. Light can make a big difference, so we're not just talking sunlight, we're talking directional light as well. Think about the point of interest within your image. That's normally the point that you will focus on when you're starting your ICM. It may be a tree in the distance, it may be two trees on the left, it may be a boulder in the front. But just think about where you would like to direct the viewer's eye when they look at your ICM. And then think about the movement of the camera in relation to the movement you want to see in the image. So if you want very smooth tree trunks, you will want to follow the movement of the tree trunk. If you don't mind whether your tree trunks are smooth and straight, then you can start to move in all kinds of directions. And then we have the shutter speed. That will affect what detail you hold or lose. And then distractions is quite a big thing with trees. The shutter speed you use will depend, just like water, on a number of factors. It will depend on the sort of result you want to achieve, whether you want a soft result or a slightly harsher, more realistic result. It will depend on the light conditions, whether you need to move your shutter speed faster or whether you can get away with it being longer, depending on whether you've got filters, that will be. And then personal choice, again, just the same as water, it will depend on whether you like a more abstract look, whether you like a softer look, that kind of thing. Just remember that the faster your shutter speeds, the faster you'll need to make your movements, exactly the same with the water. And with slow shutter speeds, you can get very creative with your movements. I find that a minimum of 1/3 of a second is necessary. That's me personally. I find that anything faster than this, I don't find that there's enough time to make the movement that doesn't look like accidental blur. Possibly longer shutter speeds, you may like to use a tripod. I won't be bringing my tripod to Dovedale because I'm just having light coming over, so I will be completely working on handheld, and that is what I do 95% of the time anyway. Just remember, whatever shutter speed you choose, you need to fill the time with movement or movements depending on what you want the result to be. This is just an example of two images made in exactly the same location. The one on the left, 0.4 seconds, and I just literally had time to do an upwards vertical movement. And you can just see it in the light sparkles here. I then put my camera on for 2 seconds. I popped a filter in front of it so I could get the 2 seconds. And what I did was I moved my camera up and down in line with one of these trees, probably this one, and kept it dead straight going up and down about 3 or 4 times. So I kept the straightness of the tree trunks, but everything else became a lot softer because what I'd done was I'd gone over the same location like 2 or 3 times, so it made it an awful lot softer. There's no right and there's no wrong images. Some of you will find one on the left nicer, some of you find one on the right you prefer. I still can't choose. I like them both for very different reasons. Movement and when to press the shutter. So in general, for whole trees, I do recommend that you use a vertical movement. Of course, you are welcome to break that idea. It's not a rule, it's just a place to start. But this is what you end up with if you go horizontally on trees. It kind of looks a little bit like a car wash. You can move upwards or downwards. Again, it's a personal choice. I tend to use upward movements an awful lot. Some people decide to use downwards movements so they can figure out where the sky is. I like to use upward movements because I generally like to have the roots of my trees in the image. And by starting where the roots are, I know that they're in the image. These are just 4 examples of exactly the same location. The top one here is very small, very, very small upwards movement here. This one here is a little bit more of a jiggle, and you can see that the whole thing has become a little bit softer. The tree trunks are a little bit softer. This one here is a smoother upwards movement. It's possible that I started this movement by starting the camera moving, then pressing the shutter and moving on because it's looking a little bit smaller. And this one for sure is how I worked. So what I did here was I started moving the camera upwards, then press the shutter and continue moving the camera in one fluid movement. But by doing that, I had no control over where the image started. Hence, I haven't got the bases of the tree trunks in. But you can see that it's quite different results that you can get, and it's a real personal thing as to what you like best. You choose the movement direction. What I would suggest is that you start with a vertical movement, but then you can add whatever you want. It might be a flick to represent the leaves. It might be a slightly horizontal movement that represents the replication of branches. It might be a shake to represent some movement you're seeing. It might be a multiple up and down movement if you've got the time and the ability to do it. You might use very small movement from the hands or very large movement from the arms and the body. It's completely your choice. This is just an example of a fairly, well, I'll call it nondescript, but some of you might be looking at it going, that's not nondescript, that's beautiful. It's a woodland that I walked into on a workshop when we were up in Scotland. And I walked in and immediately, I didn't notice the trees, I noticed this light that was along the back here. And so I did what I suggested right at the beginning. I said to myself, what am I noticing? So I noticed this light. Why am I noticing it? Is there anything coming to mind? And what suddenly sprung to mind was that it felt like I was in a cathedral with the lights right along the top of the church sort of shining through. And the rest of it was very dark, which is kind of like what a church or a cathedral is, that you just have this light coming through stained glass windows. So I made the first one, which is a fairly direct representation of what I saw, and I really quite liked it because it just showed all these little shafts of light. Then I played with a little zooming movement, and I love this because it actually looked like stained glass windows now with like some spirits or something coming through them. I really, really like that. And then I decided to go really abstract, and this is one where I zoomed quite well in, like to one of these small areas, and then I started moving the camera and pressed the shutter and carried on moving, which is why you get a really, really smooth abstract look. So for just that location with 3 different images, you can see you can get some really, really interesting results. It just depends on what you actually want to capture if you have something in mind. So when you're doing trees photography, you've got the speed of movement, which is how fast you're actually going to move the camera. You've got the fluidity of the movement, that's how smooth you make the movement. You've got the direction of the movement within the vertical for trees. And you've got when you press the shutter during the process. And then you've also got the size of the movement. So you've got all of these different elements. And they kind of go for landscape and water as well, but I've just put this in with the trees. So there's lots and lots of different elements that you can really have a think about and play with. When you're in the woods, trees, anywhere, just think of making sure that you're, and it doesn't matter, it's not just for trees, this is just thinking about the image. Sometimes the image you want to make is like literally 2 steps away from where you're standing. So don't forget to change where your feet are, and don't forget to turn around. This was just one image, and I really like this, and I don't think I've got the image in here anymore, but I just literally took 2 steps back and I got the perfect image. But I was sure that this was where it was, and then I had a little bit more of an experiment. Distractions, trees, any trees of any sort, you are going to find that sky gets in the way because naturally trees go into the sky. So you have no way of getting around this. You just have to address it and figure out how you're going to manage it. It will depend on what the sky is looking like. So if you've got a beautiful puffy blue sky or you've got a stormy sky, it may be fantastic to include that in your image. But quite often when you slow down the shutter speed, what you end up is a blown out sort of grey, whitey sky. And that's what I had here in this location. So you can see that depending on where you stand, how much you zoom in, which angle you take, whether you point the camera up or whether you point the camera down, you can have quite a big effect on how much distraction you get into your image. So here, there's a massive amount of sky. I shot quite wide here. I quite like the big tree, but when I shot this wide, I just didn't like how much white I had here. Here I zoomed in, stood pretty much the same location. You can see the sun's come out here, but I've still got this massive chunk of white, especially this. This is just completely blown out highlights, which I didn't like. Sun went in, it was a bit shady, but I did go slightly to the right to see what was behind here. Almost got rid of all the light patches, but there's a few tiny little ones just coming through. Here I moved to the left and there was a big bank of trees behind. So rather than having nothing behind, I've now got a bank of trees. So now you get quite a uniform amount of light coming through. And I quite like this. That's not too distracting anymore. Then I pointed back towards the right from the same location, and then I shot into a darker piece of woodland, and you can see there's no light coming through. This is light on the tree leaves, not light coming through. And so there's no distractions on this one with regarding sunlight. This one here is just to show you that when the sun catches wet leaves or bright leaves, you can actually have sort of quite a difference in light. And this was in the shadow, this wasn't even in the sun, but you can see where the light was coming down from in a directional way. So just have a think about how much of the sky or how much of, what bit of the location do you actually want to photograph when you're trying to manage the sky. One tip I would give, if you can get up a little bit higher than the tree that you're shooting or shoot downwards towards the trees, that's always a benefit. Even if you stand on a rock, just go like an inch, sort of 6-7 inches higher, you'll find that you lose a little bit of sky. On to landscapes to finish this little romp through these options. Look for lines in the landscape, okay? Because where we were looking for trees as being verticals, we're now looking for more horizontal lines. But we all know that landscapes don't just have straight horizontal lines. They're quite often wavy or jagged or rolling. It just completely depends on the location you're in. Don't forget to look for balance, light, again, your interest point, and think about the movement of the camera in relation to the movement you want to see in the image, and then shutter speed. These are just a few examples to talk about some options. Look for the direction of lines, but also the fluidity of smoothness in them, and then match your movements accordingly. So you can see two very, very different locations. This was a beach in Costa Rica and had some sort of rolling hills way in the distance. This was actually stood in, I think it's Winnett's Pass in the Peaks District, in the snow. Very, very craggy, very sharp, very angular. I really wanted to bring that harsh feel to it, whereas this one I wanted to bring a really smooth feel. So I matched my movements accordingly to what I was seeing in front of me. Interest, what did you actually notice? Did you notice the whole landscape? Was there a point of light or a point of colour, or was it the shape of the landscape? These are two very different locations. The one on the left is a loch in the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and the one on the right is on Drake Bay in Costa Rica. But in both times, what I saw was the light. I saw the colour and I saw the shape of the landscape. And you can see in both of these, I haven't just gone straight across. I've actually followed the shape of the landscape. And you can see this in my ICM movements, because I wanted to bring some smoothness and I wanted to bring some roundedness to it. I didn't want it to be straight and angular. I wanted to represent what I was actually seeing, not just get a very abstract image. Movement in relation to the feeling or something you notice. So does the location lift you? Does it feel open or closed? Do the lines take you somewhere? Or are there specific elements you notice? So here again, this is another loch in Scotland, and I just loved it. It was wide open and I just felt very happy, and I just wanted to portray the energy and the happiness I had feeling sat there. So I did quite big movements and I made it feel quite whimsical and wispy and open. The one on the right again, it was a very bleak landscape, and so what I ended up focusing on was any points within the landscape that I noticed, which just happened to be these fences and the tree. So again, it just depends on how much of the landscape. I've got two very different amounts of landscape in these two images. So neither's right, neither's wrong. They're both just different depictions of what I saw at the time. So again, that's something that you should take consideration of. So I'm looking forward to meeting you guys on location on Friday. If you're not joining me and you're still interested to learn more, do check out my website, charlottebellamy.com. If you'd like to drop me an email, charlotte@charlottebellamy.com. That's fairly simple. You're on my YouTube channel at the moment, so hopefully you can delve in and have a look at some of the other videos that I've set up. So I look forward to meeting those of you that are joining me on Friday, and hopefully this is useful and we can get started and really enjoy the location. See you soon.